It was the middle of July in 2023, a warm Friday night in the small town of Fairhaven, when 16-year-old Kira Lang pressed the Go Live button on her phone. She was walking home from a friend's house, her voice light, easy, filling the quiet of the suburban streets. Kira wasn't a huge name online, but her 2,000 followers were loyal. They tuned in not because she staged outrageous stunts or carefully curated content, but because she felt familiar, an ordinary teenager with quick wit, a warm smile, and a way of talking to the camera like she was talking directly to you. Her streams were a mix of casual chats, late-night walks, and silly updates about school or her dog. For her small but devoted audience, she was someone you could imagine being friends with in real life. That night, her stream started just after 10:30 p.m., lit by the soft orange glow of street lamps. She was wearing a light hoodie, her hair pulled back and earbuds in. For the first several minutes, she joked about how she'd stayed too long at her friend Marissa's, laughing about a game they'd played and the half-melted milkshake she was carrying home. Comments scrolled up the side of the feed, people asking about her weekend plans, telling her to watch out for raccoons, and teasing her about how often she walked alone at night. She brushed it off, saying Fairhaven was boring and safe, and that she'd walked this same route dozens of times. The neighborhood was quiet. In the stream's background, you could hear the faint buzz of insects and the hum of a distant air conditioner. Kira spoke casually about wanting to repaint her room, scrolling through a list of color swatches on her phone while walking. Everything felt normal, mundane even, until it didn't. Around the 8-minute mark, Kira's expression changed. It was subtle at first. Her eyes flicked briefly over her shoulder while she kept talking, but the way her words slowed suggested something had pulled her focus. The comments picked up instantly. Viewers asked if someone was behind her. She gave a quick laugh, shaking her head, saying something about hearing just a branch, or maybe a cat. Her voice stayed steady, but her pace slowed, and her gaze lingered on the space behind her. At 10:42 p.m., she stopped walking entirely. The camera angle shifted slightly as she adjusted her phone grip, pointing it toward the ground. In a voice much softer than before, she said something, just a handful of words, but the wind muffled them. Even with replay, even with enhancements later, no one could make them out clearly. The stream's live chat went wild, viewers typing in all caps, asking what was wrong. She didn't answer. Her head tilted, listening. The video blurred as her phone jolted, like she'd stumbled or turned quickly. The picture swayed for a moment, capturing the faint glow of a street lamp through a canopy of trees, before jerking again toward darkness. A breath, sharp, quick, was audible, and then the image froze for half a second, before going black. No goodbye, no fade out, no loss of signal warning. Just gone. For nearly 3 minutes after the stream ended, the chat box kept moving, filled with confusion, jokes, and concern. At first, most assumed it was an internet glitch or that her phone had died. But as the minutes passed without her returning, the tone shifted. People started asking if anyone knew her personally, if someone could text her. A few claimed they'd seen a shadow behind her in the last seconds of the video, though others dismissed it as compression artifacts. By midnight, several viewers had messaged Kira's Instagram and TikTok accounts with no response. One local follower reached out to Marissa, who confirmed Kira had left her house about 20 minutes before the stream started. When Kira still hadn't made it home by 12:30 a.m., her mother called the police. The video stayed live on her account until morning, when law enforcement contacted the platform to request its removal as part of the investigation. By then, it had been saved, screen-recorded, and dissected by dozens of people. Theories were already circulating, everything from an abduction to a staged prank gone wrong. Some swore they could hear a second set of footsteps under her voice. Others insisted they caught a deep exhale just before the screen went black. The official missing persons report was filed at 2:07 a.m., making Kira Lang's case one of the first in Fairhaven to begin with hundreds of eyewitnesses watching the final moments in real time. Police would later say that those minutes of footage were both a blessing and a curse, the best lead they had, and yet a recording that raised more questions than it answered. In the days that followed, that short, unsettling live stream would be replayed countless times, not just by investigators, but by her followers, each hoping they'd catch the detail everyone else had missed. Somewhere in those final seconds, people believed, was the answer to what happened on that quiet summer night. And as the search began, the weight of that video would hang over every step, every interview, and every theory, pressing the question no one yet knew how to answer. What had stopped her mid-sentence? Investigators began their work in the hours immediately following the report of Kira's disappearance, starting with the short walk she'd been making when her live stream abruptly ended. From Marissa's front porch to Kira's house, the distance was just under a mile, less than 15 minutes at her usual pace. It was a route she'd taken dozens of times, usually without incident, winding past quiet homes before crossing a small bridge over the creek that fed into Fairhaven's wooded greenbelt. On paper, it was an unremarkable stretch of suburban street, lit here and there by aging street lamps that left pockets of shadow between the pools of light. Detectives pulled the GPS metadata from her livestream, matching it against cell tower pings from her phone. The data showed her moving steadily along her usual path until 10:43 p.m., when the signal stopped transmitting just shy of the bridge. That location became the center of the first search grid. Officers taped off both ends, working outward with flashlights and trained dogs. Residents reported nothing unusual at the time, no screams, no sudden traffic, but one woman did recall hearing a quick shuffle, like someone running for a second, then stopping, around that hour. She had assumed it was a jogger. On the asphalt near the bridge's entrance, officers found a single black hair clip. It was the kind Kira often wore to keep her hair from falling forward, and when shown it later, her mother confirmed it was hers. It was lying a few feet from the curb, undamaged, with no obvious sign of having been stepped on or dropped in a struggle. A few yards beyond that, in the grass leading toward the tree line, faint disturbances in the soil caught an investigator's eye. They were subtle, less like footprints and more like two parallel marks pressed into the ground, as though something had been dragged or pulled. The marks extended only about 20 feet before vanishing abruptly among the dry leaves. The lack of clear prints or tire tracks puzzled the search team. The soil was soft enough that anyone walking or carrying weight should have left deeper impressions, yet there was nothing. No discarded belongings, no torn fabric, no signs of a fight. The drag marks themselves were uneven, as if whatever made them had shifted from side to side, but their sudden end made no immediate sense. K-9 units swept the area, alerting faintly near the creek bed, but failing to maintain a consistent trail. The creek's current was slow that summer, but its banks were cluttered with brush and downed branches that could easily obscure small items. Officers moved the search downstream for nearly a mile without finding anything else connected to Kira. By sunrise, the bridge and greenbelt had been combed multiple times. Volunteers joined the search, fanning out into the woods, checking sheds and backyards along the route. The more they retraced her steps, the stranger the absence of evidence became. If she had been grabbed, there should have been more. Something dropped, clothing disturbed, impressions in the soil. If she'd run off willingly, there should have been footprints or witnesses who saw her leave the road. Instead, it was as if she'd simply stepped out of frame and into nothing. Investigators mapped the path again, this time noting the street lamps and dark spots between them. The last lamp before the bridge was out, creating a 30-foot stretch of near-total darkness, the same gap where her GPS signal stopped. For police, it became the first fixed point in their timeline, a spot where she was alive, walking, speaking to her followers one moment and gone the next. Over the following days, the bridge area was searched repeatedly, but the scene remained stubbornly clean. Officers documented every possible route someone could have taken to remove her from that spot unseen, through the greenbelt toward the service road, across the creek toward the back of the industrial park. But each scenario led back to the same problem. There was no physical trace beyond that short set of marks in the grass. To Kira's family, the location itself felt like an intrusion into their memories of her. It was just an ordinary shortcut, a safe, familiar part of her walk home. Now, it was a place where the map stopped and the questions began. And as detectives prepared to move into the digital side of the case, examining the live stream's audio in detail, those 20 feet of disturbed grass would remain one of the few tangible pieces of her last known route, a fragment that both narrowed the timeline and deepened the mystery of where she went next. When the investigation reached its third week, the focus shifted from the physical search to the digital record of Kira's last moments online. The live stream, already dissected countless times by her followers, was turned over to the state's audio forensics lab. Investigators wanted more than public speculation. They wanted to know exactly what the microphone had captured in those final seconds before the feed went dark. The process was painstaking. Technicians isolated the audio track, stripping away the ambient hum of the street lamps, the hiss of passing summer insects, and the faint static of the phone's connection. What emerged beneath Kira's voice was subtle but chilling, the sound of slow, heavy breathing that wasn't hers. It had a different cadence, longer inhales, shallow exhales, uneven enough to suggest exertion or nervousness. The breathing persisted for several seconds before being joined by something else, a low male voice. The words were impossible to make out. Even with advanced filtering, they were muffled, as if spoken from just beyond the microphone's optimal range or through fabric. Some forensic specialists argued the voice was close to Kira, potentially just behind or beside her, while others believed it was captured from farther away, perhaps carried on the air from within the greenbelt. The disagreement mattered. If the voice was near, it meant her abductor was almost within arm's reach before the feed ended. If it was distant, it might have been a second person, or even someone unrelated who happened to be nearby. In the moment immediately following the voice, a sharp, high-pitched sound cut through the track, a noise that could be interpreted in several ways. To some ears it was a gasp, the kind made in surprise or fear. To others it was the first syllable of a cry, abruptly silenced. The waveform analysis showed a sudden spike, consistent with a startled vocalization, followed by a low thud in the background. No one could say for certain whether that thud was the sound of the phone being jostled or something striking the ground. Outside the lab, the debate exploded online. Amateur sleuths used home audio software to produce their own versions of the clip, uploading slowed down, pitch-shifted, and inverted tracks to forums and social media. Some claimed they heard the man say her name. Others thought it was a command, "Don't move," or "Come here." A smaller group insisted the voice wasn't directed at her at all, but to someone else entirely, possibly indicating two or more people were present. The visual side of the livestream came under renewed scrutiny as well. A frame-by-frame breakdown revealed a detail that would fuel weeks of speculation. Just before the sound of the voice, Kira's gaze shifts, not over her shoulder, but upward. The movement is quick, deliberate, and her pupils widen in the streetlight's glow. To the casual viewer, it might mean nothing, but in the context of what followed, it became one of the most argued-over moments in the case. Was she looking up at a figure on the bridge's elevated walkway? Had she caught sight of someone leaning over from the slope of the greenbelt? Or, as a few suggested, was she reacting to something above her entirely, something moving in the branches of the overhanging trees? The theories multiplied, but none could be confirmed without more visual evidence than the compressed, low-light footage allowed. For the detectives, the audio report was both a breakthrough and a frustration. They now had confirmation that someone else's voice was present in the final seconds, but without identifying what was said or how far away it was, they couldn't anchor it to a suspect. The sound of breathing, in particular, lingered with them. It was so close, so human, and so deliberate that it gave the impression of someone trying to stay quiet, but unable to suppress the natural rhythm of air in and out. What the forensics couldn't answer, the online community tried to fill in. Timelines were redrawn, speculative maps marked with possible sightlines and positions from which the voice could have carried. Viewers rewatched the moment her eyes moved upward, trying to put themselves in her shoes, imagining what would cause them to react like that without breaking stride or screaming outright. The official report, when released, offered only a cautious summary. Unidentified secondary voice detected, unable to confirm distance or content. Additional background noises present, probable human respiration, possible vocal distress. It was clinical, stripped of the dread that had seeped into every public discussion of the case. But for those who had watched the stream live or replayed it late at night with the volume turned all the way up, it confirmed what they'd already suspected. She hadn't been alone. and whatever was with her in those seconds before the screen went black was close enough to be heard, but far enough to remain a mystery. That gap between presence and proof would become the next battleground for investigators and armchair detectives alike, each convinced that if they could just hear the right inflection, isolate the right syllable, they might unlock the truth about who was there and what Kira saw when her eyes darted upward for the last time. The tip came in late on a Tuesday night, nearly a month after Kira vanished. A middle-aged man, who declined to give his name publicly, contacted the police to report something he'd seen on the night of her disappearance. He said he'd been driving home from a late shift, heading along the road that passed near the bridge when his headlights briefly illuminated a figure standing at the edge of the greenbelt. The man described the person as tall, wearing a dark hooded sweatshirt with the hood up, their face obscured in shadow. They weren't moving, just standing slightly off the shoulder, angled toward the road, watching. The caller remembered thinking it was odd, but not enough to stop. It wasn't until the news broke the next day about Kira's missing status that the site began to bother him. He sat on it for weeks, unsure whether it was worth reporting, before finally calling it in. Detectives took his statement in detail, pressing him for specifics. The man admitted the encounter lasted no more than 2 or 3 seconds as his car passed, but he was certain about the posture, the way the figure's head seemed to follow his vehicle as if tracking it. He thought the person was male, though he couldn't be certain, and guessed their height at around 6 feet. He couldn't recall if the hands were in pockets or at their sides, and said the clothing looked plain. No logos, no patterns, nothing to stand out except the way they seemed fixed in place in the middle of the night. From his description, a composite sketch was created and released to the public. The image showed a man with a narrow jaw, prominent brow, and deep-set eyes, framed by the shadow of a raised hood. It was intentionally vague in detail. Artists couldn't add features the witness couldn't confirm, but even so, local residents reacted with unease. Social media lit up with speculation. Some swore they'd seen someone matching that look walking along the service road weeks before. Others accused police of chasing shadows, pointing out that a hooded sweatshirt was hardly unique. Then came the development that shifted the investigation's tone. While cross-referencing the tip with local offender registries, detectives found a name: Paul Kettering, a registered sex offender in his late 30s who lived just half a mile from the bridge. Kettering had prior convictions for unlawful restraint and attempted abduction, both involving young women. His physical description matched parts of the sketch: the build, the height, even the angular jawline the witness had noted. Detectives moved quickly to bring him in for questioning. Kettering denied any involvement, saying he had been at a 24-hour laundromat across town during the time Kira disappeared. When asked to prove it, he pointed to the business's security cameras. Investigators obtained the footage, and, sure enough, there he was, sitting at a folding table, scrolling through his phone, with a laundry basket at his feet. The problem was, the footage was grainy, and the timestamps weren't perfectly aligned with police timelines. The video showed him there between 10:15 and 10:50 p.m., which could have overlapped with the window of Kira's disappearance, but just barely. If he had left immediately after, he might still have had time to reach the bridge on foot or by car. The laundromat owner insisted the clock in the system ran about 6 minutes slow, meaning the timeline technically cleared him. Still, detectives noted that the camera never captured him entering or leaving, only sitting at the table. Without more angles, they couldn't confirm whether he'd been there the entire time. Word of Kettering's potential link leaked to the press within days. Headlines didn't outright name him, but made it obvious to anyone willing to check public records. Fear in the community escalated sharply. Parents stopped letting kids walk to school, and some residents began organizing informal patrols. Police, under pressure, clarified that Kettering was not currently a suspect, only a person of interest who had been interviewed and released. But behind closed doors, some investigators weren't ready to cross him off the list. His proximity to the bridge, his history, and the incomplete nature of his alibi kept him in the margins of their files. They monitored his movements quietly, but without new evidence, they couldn't hold him. The case stalled there. The witness who had seen the hooded figure never came forward publicly, wary of being dragged into speculation. The composite sketch faded from the evening news, replaced by other leads and dead ends. Yet for many in Fairhaven, the image of that lone figure at the Greenbelt's edge, silent, still, watching the road, remained fixed in their minds, a shadow that refused to resolve into something harmless. Whether it was Kettering, a stranger passing through, or someone else entirely, no one could say. What they did know was that it was the last solid sighting of any unknown person near the place where Kira disappeared, and that detail would haunt the investigation for months to come. 2 months after Kira vanished, the case had grown cold enough that media coverage was starting to fade. Search efforts had slowed, and without new tips, investigators were relying on routine patrols and the occasional lead that rarely went anywhere. That's why the call from a man kayaking along the South Fork River immediately drew attention. He'd been navigating a shallow stretch downstream from the bridge, roughly 3 miles away, when he spotted something metallic glinting between a cluster of partially submerged rocks. At first, he thought it was a scrap of aluminum or a lost fishing lure. When he pulled it free, he realized it was a smartphone. The device was waterlogged, its casing scuffed and cracked, and a fine layer of silt coated the charging port. The kayaker turned it over to police, who quickly noted it matched the model and color of Kira's missing phone. The serial number confirmed the match. Detectives couldn't determine how long it had been in the river, but its condition suggested it had spent weeks, possibly the entire 2 months, underwater or caught in the shifting current. The phone was sent to the digital forensics unit, where technicians carefully disassembled it, cleaning corrosion and replacing components in an attempt to salvage any data. Much of the internal storage was corrupted beyond repair. Photos, messages, and app logs had degraded to unreadable fragments. Still, a small amount of data survived, enough to offer a haunting glimpse into what might have happened after her disappearance. Among the few recoverable files was a single video clip, 37 seconds long. Its timestamp placed it at 11:41 p.m., on the night she went missing, nearly an hour after the livestream had abruptly cut out. The video itself was shaky and poorly lit. It appeared to have been recorded outdoors at night, aimed upward through a dense canopy of leaves. The only visible movement was the swaying of branches, illuminated faintly by what could have been moonlight or a distant artificial source. No faces appeared, no voices spoke, and there was no audible conversation, just the faint rustle of leaves and a low, ambient hum, possibly from a road or distant machinery. Detectives studied the footage frame by frame. In the background, a thin, indistinct line of light occasionally flickered along the edge of the branches. Some believed it might have been a street lamp seen from below. Others suggested it was the beam of a flashlight sweeping through the trees. The angle of the shot, however, was strange, almost as if the phone had been lying on the ground, pointed up, or held loosely by someone who wasn't focused on filming. The device log showed it had been activated exactly at the moment the video began, stayed on for the duration of the clip, and then powered down again. It wasn't clear whether the phone had been shut off intentionally or if the battery had simply died. What unsettled investigators most was the gap in the timeline. Kira had last been seen at 10:43 p.m., and the next known activity on her phone was this recording, nearly 60 minutes later from an unknown location. Theories began forming almost immediately. One possibility was that Kira herself had recorded the video, perhaps as a signal or to capture something she'd seen. Another was that someone else had possession of her phone by then, whether intentionally documenting something or activating it by accident. The location couldn't be pinpointed from the footage alone. GPS data for that period had been wiped, possibly overwritten by the damage, leaving only the bare timestamp as a clue. Public reaction was intense when news of the recovered phone leaked. For Kira's family, the clip was agonizing. It suggested she had been alive, or at least that her phone had been in use, long after the moment most people assumed she'd been taken. The lack of any identifiable landmarks or voices meant they were left with nothing but questions. Was she still in the area by the river? Had she been moved elsewhere and the phone later discarded? Had the current carried it from a completely different drop point? For police, the find was a double-edged sword. It was their first tangible piece of evidence in weeks, yet it came with no clear answers. The phone's discovery point downstream could have been the result of direct disposal, accidental loss, or river drift over a considerable distance. The absence of footprints or drag marks along the bank where it might have entered the water left the timeline frustratingly open-ended. In the official case file, the phone was logged as Exhibit 27. Internally, it was regarded as one of the most important artifacts recovered since the night she disappeared, proof that the trail hadn't gone completely cold in those lost minutes and hours. But without knowing who had been holding it when the branches swayed above the lens, it was also a reminder of how close they might be to answers and how far they still had to go. For nearly 2 years, the investigation into Kira's disappearance faded into the background. The searches had stopped, the tips slowed to a trickle, and the case files gathered dust in the precinct's cold case unit. Her social media accounts, once a steady stream of casual updates and nighttime walks, were formally memorialized at her family's request. The profile photo remained, but new posts were impossible, and comment sections became a mixture of condolences, unanswered pleas for updates, and the occasional cruel hoax. Her parents retreated from public life, declining interviews and limiting their contact with the online community that had once rallied to help find her. It was in this heavy silence in mid-2025 that something impossible happened. Subscribers to Kira's old Livestream channel, some who hadn't received a notification in years, suddenly got the same alert on their phones. Live. The push notification didn't link to an archived clip or a past highlight. It indicated an active broadcast, just as it had on the night she disappeared. The timestamp was current. Dozens of people, spread across different time zones, tapped in almost immediately. Many assumed it was a hack, or perhaps a cruel prank exploiting a dead girl's account. But the stream wasn't what they expected. The screen was completely black, no movement, no shapes, nothing to suggest the camera was capturing a lit environment. White static hissed faintly, but under it, unmistakable to those listening closely, was breathing. It wasn't the long, steady rhythm of someone asleep. This breathing was slow, deliberate, and slightly uneven, as though the person on the other end was trying to keep quiet but couldn't control the sound entirely. There were no words, no background noise to indicate location. The static hiss fluctuated slightly, and at one point the breathing hitched, followed by a faint, almost imperceptible rustle, like fabric shifting. The stream lasted 31 seconds. Then, without warning, the feed cut out. No ending screen, no connection lost message, just gone. Those who'd been watching immediately began messaging each other and posting to forums, trying to confirm they'd all seen and heard the same thing. Within minutes, multiple viewers contacted local police, forwarding screenshots of the push notification and, in some cases, screen recordings of the event. When detectives received the reports, their first assumption was account compromise. They contacted the streaming platform, requesting login and server activity for the account. What they got back deepened the mystery. The log showed no signs of a new login, no change in IP address, no session token issued, no sign that anyone, authorized or not, had accessed the account. In fact, the records confirmed the account was still in its memorialized state. According to the platform's own support documentation, such accounts could not initiate new broadcasts under any circumstance. When pressed, the service provider's engineers were adamant. From a technical standpoint, what had happened should not have been possible. A memorialized account wasn't just locked. It was essentially frozen in place, stripped of the back-end permissions required to go live. They even suggested the possibility of a display glitch or a coordinated hoax from the viewers themselves. But that theory faltered when investigators compared recordings from multiple devices and found them consistent, down to the faint timing of each breath. Digital forensics experts attempted to trace the origin of the broadcast. What they found was frustratingly vague. The session metadata was incomplete, containing only partial routing information, most of which pointed back to the platform's own servers. Whether this was a byproduct of the memorialization process or deliberate obfuscation by some unknown method, no one could say for certain. The families of her subscribers reacted with a mixture of skepticism and dread. For Kira's mother, the breathing was almost unbearable to hear. She swore it was her daughter. Something about the subtle hitch at the end of each inhale reminded her of the way Kira sounded when nervous or winded. Others pointed out that in the original 2023 audio analysis, there had been a moment of audible breathing just before her stream cut out that night. To them, the resemblance wasn't coincidence. Police filed the incident under unverified lead, but internally it reignited interest in the case. If the broadcast was authentic, it meant either someone had found a way to manipulate a locked account for unknown purposes, or, less likely but far more unsettling, that the phone, or someone with access to her original account credentials, was active again. Neither possibility brought comfort. For the online community that had once rallied around her search, the event fractured opinion. Some saw it as proof she was still alive somewhere, reaching out the only way she could. Others dismissed it as the work of a malicious troll exploiting an old tragedy. But for every person who doubted, there was another who kept their notifications on, waiting for the next alert, hoping that if it happened again, the stream might last long enough to give away more than the sound of someone quietly breathing in the dark. In the weeks after the unexplained broadcast, a small but tightly connected group of Kira's most loyal followers began noticing things they couldn't easily explain. These weren't the typical online hoaxes or vague rumors that swirl around cold cases. They were specific, time-stamped events that seemed to defy the memorialized status of her account. The first incidents came as sudden push notifications. A handful of subscribers received alerts from Kira's Livestream channel, notifications identical to the one they'd gotten before the 31-second breathing stream. Each time the message read, "Live." But when they tapped it, the app either froze for a moment or the alert vanished entirely. No feed loaded, no archive appeared, and there was no trace in their notification history. Some said it happened in the middle of the night, others during the day, but always with no record that it had ever occurred. One viewer claimed to have started a screen recording seconds after receiving the alert, only to watch it disappear before they could interact with it. Soon after, followers began noticing something different in her archived videos. People who had watched them dozens of times before swore they now contained faint background noises that hadn't been present originally. If the volume was turned high enough, there were muffled breaths or the soft rustle of fabric slipping into the spaces between her words. Skeptics argued it was compression distortion or background sound from the original recording, but those who had seen the videos when they first went up were convinced the audio had changed. Then came the direct messages. Several followers reported receiving short, unsettling notes from brand-new burner accounts. The usernames were random strings of characters, profile pictures blank or pulled from generic stock photos. Each message contained the same words. "Do you hear me now?" At first, recipients assumed it was trolling, someone trying to spook people still invested in the case. But when the accounts were reported and removed, new ones emerged, sending the same question. The pattern repeated for weeks, and the accounts were always deleted before they could be traced. The most disturbing moment came from a 19-year-old follower named Mallory, who had been among the first to watch Kira's final stream live in 2023. One night, she received the same live notification. Determined not to miss anything, she started screen recording before unlocking her phone. The stream that loaded showed nothing, just a dark, silent feed. But about 4 seconds in, a voice softly spoke Kira's name. It was barely above a whisper, the kind of tone used when you're close enough that shouting isn't necessary. After that, the familiar static hiss began, paired with the sound of slow, deliberate breathing until the feed cut out at the 18-second mark. The next morning, Mallory turned the recording over to police. Forensic analysts confirmed that the audio didn't match any of the app's standard error sounds or placeholder clips. It was a live feed of some kind, with audio consistent across the full recording. But that was as far as they could go. They couldn't confirm whether it had originated from Kira's account, her original device, or something made to appear that way. The platform's logs again showed no sign of a new login. To the followers experiencing these events, the police's explanation, that it was likely an elaborate prank, felt dismissive. Many were certain the strange notifications, altered video audio, and burner messages were all connected. They believed someone was deliberately trying to communicate, whether it was Kira herself or someone else who had access to her account or device. Others in the wider community suggested it might be a calculated stunt by an unknown party, enough to reignite interest in the case without ever revealing the truth. Whatever the motive, the incidents had a unifying effect on the group. They kept their phones charged and notifications on at all times, worried that the next alert might be the one that finally lasted long enough to reveal where she was or who was behind it. Late at night, they rewatched old clips, straining to hear any faint voice or sound out of place. They compared timestamps, piecing together possible timelines of when the alerts appeared, looking for patterns in time zones, dates, or even moon phases. The broadcasts had offered no clear answers, only questions, but for those still listening for her, the silence of the past 2 years had shifted into something far more urgent. It was no longer just about what happened to Kira on the night she vanished. It was about who or what might still be reaching out now, asking if they could be heard. 2 years after Kira's disappearance, with the strange new broadcasts stirring up renewed public interest, the digital forensics team decided to revisit the very beginning, the original 2023 livestream. The file had already been pored over countless times, but this time, specialists brought in new software capable of enhancing low-light footage without introducing the kind of artifacts that could mislead analysis. Their goal was simple: search every single frame for details that might have been missed the first time. They started with the final 2 minutes before the feed cut out, when Kira's behavior subtly shifted, her pace slowing, her voice lowering, her eyes moving to places off-camera. By adjusting the shadow levels and contrast ratios, they began to pick up faint shapes and tonal differences in areas previously lost in darkness. In one stretch of the footage, as she passed in front of a small corner store with large glass windows, a peculiar reflection appeared. At first glance, it seemed unremarkable, a vague humanoid outline behind her in the glass, distorted by the angle and motion blur. But when the team froze the frame and increased the resolution mapping, more elements came into view, details that made no sense for the location or time of night. Behind the figure was not the dimly lit street or the faint silhouette of trees from across the road. Instead, there appeared to be the interior of a room. The image was crude, but certain details stood out: a cluttered space with objects stacked haphazardly, the edge of what looked like a metal shelving unit, and above it all, a bare light bulb hanging from a cord, casting a stark glow over part of the scene. It didn't resemble any part of the street she was walking along. The corner store had been closed for hours that night, and security camera footage confirmed its interior lights were off. More puzzling, the vantage point of the reflection should have been showing the outdoor environment, not an enclosed, furnished space. The team cross-referenced the location and angle of the window in the frame with a site visit. Standing in Kira's approximate position from that night, they photographed the window with a range of lighting conditions. None reproduced anything close to what was captured in the enhanced footage. The only thing visible in real life was the empty street, and faintly, the bridge down the road. No shelves, no bulb, no cluttered room. This discrepancy sparked two competing theories. The first, offered by some of the tech specialists, was that the image was the result of a rare compression glitch. When live video is streamed over a mobile network, frames can sometimes be blended with fragments of other cached images, particularly if the phone's memory is taxed. They suggested that the room could have been an accidental overlay of a past photo or video from her device, momentarily inserted into the stream data by error. The second theory, pushed by a smaller but more vocal group, was more unsettling. They posited that what viewers saw wasn't an error at all, but an unintentional glimpse into wherever Kira ended up, somehow reflected in the feed just before she disappeared. The idea hinged on the notion that the phone might have already been in proximity to that room, and that what the stream showed was a transition point between her last known location and the place she was taken. Investigators struggled with the logistics of this second idea. There was no technical precedent for a phone capturing a live reflection of a completely different environment without either being physically present there or manipulated in post-production, which was impossible in a live stream. Yet the detail of the bare bulb, stark and unshaded, matched descriptions in a few other odd places in the case file. One early witness, a man who'd heard what he described as a muffled cry near the bridge that night, had also mentioned seeing a dim bulb through a high basement window while passing a nearby industrial building. Police released no public statement about the discovery, citing concerns about contaminating potential evidence. Internally, however, the frame was printed and placed in the active file, marked with the notation, "Possible anomaly, unexplained." Attempts to replicate the phenomenon through simulations failed repeatedly. The forensic unit ran multiple stress tests on similar phone models, even deliberately corrupting video streams, but none produced an image as coherent or contextually strange as the one in Kira's footage. When word of the frame eventually leaked, it fueled a new wave of speculation online. Some insisted it was proof she had been taken inside a hidden location close to her route home. Others argued it was simply the brain's tendency to find patterns in noise, seeing a room where none existed. But the reflection didn't fade from the minds of those who saw it. For them, it was a clue too specific to ignore, an impossible image burned into the glass of a window that on that night should have been showing nothing but darkness. For the investigators who had been on the case since day one, the discovery was a reminder of how elusive the truth had become. Every time they circled back to the beginning, looking for clarity, they found something that raised more questions instead. Whether the reflection was a glitch, a coincidence, or a glimpse into the place where Kira spent her last known moments, it was one more fragment in a puzzle that still refused to come together. Almost 5 months after the eerie 30-second broadcast that had reignited Kira's case, it happened again. Only this time, it was longer, clearer, and far more disturbing. On a quiet Wednesday night at 12:14 a.m., her memorialized Livestream account once again sent a live notification to a subset of her remaining followers. Many of them had been keeping their phones nearby for exactly this reason, and within seconds, dozens were watching. The feed opened to darkness at first, but not the total black screen of the previous broadcast. A faint light source, yellowish and flickering, brought just enough visibility to make out shapes. The camera seemed stationary, set low to the ground, and tilted slightly upward toward the corner of a dim, confined room. Against one wall lay a thin mattress with no bedding, just bare fabric stained in irregular patterns. Behind it, the far wall appeared to contain a metal door, its surface dull and mottled. Across the middle of that door, something glinted, a chain secured through a bolted hasp. For the first full minute, the only sound was breathing, close to the microphone, uneven and subtly irregular, like the person was either cold or trying to control their breathing under stress. The inhale was slightly longer than the exhale, a rhythm repeated over and over without any words. The camera angle never shifted, but at times, shadows passed across the light, briefly obscuring the door. At 1 minute, 40 seconds, a new sound emerged, a faint, deliberate tapping. It was slow, methodical, and rhythmic. 3 taps, a pause, then 3 more. The source wasn't visible, but the microphone picked it up distinctly. Viewers later disagreed about what it meant. Some thought it was a coded message. Others believed it was an attempt to draw attention from someone outside the room. The pattern repeated several times before stopping abruptly. Around the 2-minute mark, there was a faint rustle near the device, as though something or someone had brushed past it. The breathing grew slightly louder, and for a brief moment, a fragment of a whisper could be heard, too soft and clipped to make out. Those who replayed their recordings swore they heard the syllables of a name, but no one could agree on which name it was. The stream ended at 2 minutes and 58 seconds, abruptly, without warning, just as the first one had. Within minutes, recordings began circulating among the core group of followers who had been documenting every anomaly since the case first broke. Several contacted law enforcement directly, sending their copies along with precise timestamps of the breathing changes, the tapping, and the possible whisper. Investigators moved quickly to secure the platform's session logs. They found that, unlike the first unexplained broadcast, this one had generated a traceable IP signature. But any hope of a breakthrough evaporated when they realized it was routed through multiple proxies, each in a different state, with the final node located hundreds of miles from where Kira had disappeared. Cybercrime specialists noted the routing was deliberate, designed to frustrate tracking efforts. What puzzled the technical team was that, despite the layered proxies, the data packet structure suggested the stream originated from a mobile device rather than a fixed computer or server. This implied either a phone was being used in real time or someone had gone to great lengths to mimic the digital fingerprint of one. The location visible in the stream didn't match any known property connected to the case. Detectives scoured missing person leads and abandoned building registries, looking for any match to a chained metal door in a small, dimly lit room. They came up empty. There was no record of a building inspection, police raid, or trespass report that described anything similar. When the details leaked to the public, the footage became an object of obsession. Amateur sleuths combed through still frames, enhancing them, trying to read scratches on the door or make out shapes in the shadowy corners. Some thought they saw a partial boot print near the mattress. Others fixated on the way the chain was looped, speculating it had been secured from the outside. For Kira's mother, the broadcast was both unbearable and impossible to ignore. She told reporters she recognized the breathing, the slight hitch on every third inhale, something she'd noticed when her daughter was anxious as a child. Investigators refused to speculate on whether it could have been her, but privately, several admitted the resemblance was troubling. Officially, the second stream was logged as unverified audiovisual material and folded into the case file. But for those who watched it live, it felt like more than a coincidence. Whether it was Kira herself or someone staging the broadcast, the message was clear. This wasn't over. And with every unanswered question about where that room was, who was holding the camera, and why the feed stopped exactly when it did, the mystery only deepened. The second unexplained broadcast set off a wave of renewed urgency in the investigation, but despite the energy it brought, the weeks that followed produced no breakthroughs. Detectives traced every lead generated by the footage, tips about buildings with chained doors, basements with bare bulbs, and properties rumored to be abandoned, but each one collapsed under scrutiny. Some were already demolished, others long since renovated, and many proved to be unrelated entirely. Even with assistance from agencies in multiple states, no one could match the room seen in the stream to a real location. Forensic experts dissected the video frame by frame, searching for hidden clues, patterns in the wall texture, the angle of the light source, even dust motes drifting in the air. They tested the audio as well, running spectral analyses on the breathing, the faint tapping, and the brief, clipped whisper. The results were maddeningly inconclusive. Nothing in the recording tied it definitively to Kira or to any known suspect. It was as though the footage existed in a vacuum, stripped of the forensic markers investigators rely on to anchor events in time and place. The lack of progress split opinion among those studying the case. Several experts in digital forensics and criminology began to lean toward the theory that both the first and second breathing streams were staged by a highly skilled hoaxer. They argued that the broadcasts were designed to exploit the public's fixation on Kira's disappearance, timed to reignite interest just as it was fading. To them, the technical hurdles, the use of proxies, the manipulation of a memorialized account, pointed to someone with both the knowledge and the motivation to engineer an elaborate deception. Others refused to accept that explanation. Among them was Kira's mother, who remained adamant that the breathing was her daughter's. She cited the subtle hitch in every few breaths, something she claimed was a lifelong quirk whenever Kira was anxious. To her, the sound was personal, intimate, and unmistakable. She believed the room in the second stream was not a fabrication, but a window into her daughter's current reality, proof she was alive but trapped somewhere, unable to speak freely. The online community was equally divided. Skeptics dissected the proxy routing and technical inconsistencies as evidence of a hoax, while believers compiled side-by-side comparisons of Kira's known breathing patterns, voice inflections, and even body language from old videos. Every minor detail became a point of contention. Was the tapping in the second stream a coded distress signal or simply ambient noise? Was the chain on the door functional or just staged for effect? Did the lighting suggest a basement or could it have been an improvised set? Law enforcement, caught between these conflicting narratives, maintained their official stance. The case remained open, but without corroborating evidence, the streams could not be treated as verified proof of life. They continued to monitor for further broadcasts, reaching out to the platform with standing orders to alert them to any activity on the account. No new alerts came. Months passed in a tense limbo. The tips slowed again, the online discussions became sporadic, and the momentum sparked by the second stream began to dissipate. For many, the mystery receded back into the realm of unsolved tragedies, another case too strange to solve and too haunting to forget. Yet, for a small core of her followers, the memory of those broadcasts never dulled. They kept their notifications on, re-watched their recordings late at night, and listened for the smallest variations in sound that might hint at meaning. In the end, the official file on Kira Lang remained unchanged. Status: missing, presumed abducted. Case unresolved, no location identified, no suspect named, no evidence sufficient to close the investigation. The breathing streams were archived alongside her final 2023 broadcast, marked as anomalous events, with a note that their origin could not be verified. For her mother, and for the loyal few still waiting for the next impossible alert, the sound of that slow, uneven breathing in the dark had become more than an eerie reminder. It was a signal, muted, fragile, but deliberate, that they couldn't stop listening for. Because if she was still out there, somewhere behind a chained door and a bare bulb, then maybe one day it would lead them to her.